The room held its breath the moment Edmund Nakagawa stood up from his table. Not everyone caught it right away. The Fairmont Royal York Ballroom was full. Architects, developers, journalists, city councilors nursing their second drinks, and the awards program had been running for 2 hours without incident. But Edmund had a quality that rooms recognized before they understood why, a stillness that drew attention the way a held note draws silence, and one by one heads turned. Garrett Ashby noticed from the stage. His mouth kept moving for another few seconds, finishing his sentence about the responsibility of design to the emotional life of the people who inhabited a space. But his eyes had gone somewhere else entirely. Solange Tremblay-Osei watched from a table near the edge of the room and said nothing. She had been watching Garrett for the better part of 2 hours. She knew how to do that. The moment she had walked through the ballroom doors, 40 minutes earlier, Garrett had gone very still. He was standing near the bar with his new wife, Portia, a sharp, carefully assembled woman who wore her jewelry like armor, and he had a champagne glass raised in conversation and a smile that had been earning him business for 15 years. The smile didn't disappear when he saw Solange. It simply stopped meaning anything. Portia noticed. She followed his gaze across the room and then looked back at him. "Who is she?" "Nobody," Garrett said. "Someone I used to know." But Solange wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Edmund. Edmund Nakagawa was 61 years old and had spent 3 decades building Nakagawa Developments into the largest mixed-use developer in Western Canada. His waterfront regeneration project in Vancouver, $2.4 billion, 42 acres, currently on the cover of every architecture publication in the country, had made him the most sought-after client in the industry. He had been nominated as tonight's honorary patron. He had been in the room for an hour without speaking to a single person who mattered, which was the clearest possible signal of how much he mattered. He was also looking back at Solange with the focused attention of someone who has spent several months trying to find exactly where a thing began. He crossed the room toward her, not hurrying, past the deputy mayor and 2 members of the Ontario cabinet and the chair of the design school, and he stopped in front of her like that was the only direction the room had. Garrett set his champagne glass down on a passing tray and moved toward them. 6 years earlier, Ashby Design Group occupied the 4th floor of a converted textile warehouse in Corktown, Toronto. All exposed brick and enormous north-facing windows and the particular smell of drafting paper that Solange had loved since her first year of architecture school. There were 7 of them then. Garrett, Solange, 3 junior designers, an office manager, and a structural engineer who came in twice a week. They had built a modest reputation on restaurant fit-outs and small hospitality projects. Nothing that made anyone sit up. Solange was the one who changed that. She had been developing a framework for 2 years before she ever put a name to it. She called it environmental narrative design, a philosophy of space that treated every room not as a surface problem but as an emotional seek, a story told to the body before the conscious mind had time to interpret it. She mapped the relationship between ceiling height and psychological safety. She documented how threshold geometry affected the quality of attention people brought into a meeting. She charted the way material texture and light temperature could shift a person's emotional state across a working day. Without their awareness, the way a piece of music could change a mood before anyone recognized the melody. She filled 4 notebooks with it. She built it into their pitch process. She rebuilt the entire design methodology of the firm around it. "I don't have a word for what you've done here," Garrett told her one evening, reading through her documentation while she sat at the long drafting table, her natural hair pulled back with a clip, a cup of cold coffee forgotten at her elbow. "You've made intuition into a system." She looked up. "That's the whole point." He kissed her. She tasted like cold coffee and the kind of conviction that doesn't need to be explained. The Meridian Capital pitch was supposed to be everything, their biggest opportunity. Solange had spent 16 weeks developing the full environmental concept for Meridian's new financial district headquarters, a sequence of spaces designed to guide employees through different cognitive and emotional modes across the working day, using nothing but material, light, and the architecture of thresholds. No signage, no directives, just the building itself doing what a well-designed building could do. It was the most elegant proposal she had ever written. Garrett presented it without her. She found out when the project coordinator called the office to confirm a specification detail and asked to speak to Garrett directly about his approach. Solange pulled up the pitch recording. Her diagrams were on every slide. Her documented methodology was the structural spine of the entire presentation. Her name was not spoken once. That evening she waited in the underground parking structure of the Meridian Tower. "What happened in there?" she said when Garrett came through the doors, loosening his tie, still buzzing with the particular energy of a room that had gone well. He looked at her with the brief surprise of a man who had not considered she might be here. "We got it, Solange. We got the contract. Meridian's in." "You got it. I watched the recording. You didn't say my name once." "I said our team, our methodology. I said we." "You said your breakthrough. That was your exact phrase." "I built that methodology, Garrett. Every diagram, every principle, 4 notebooks of original thinking, that was mine." He exhaled through his nose, patient in the specific way that implied she was failing to grasp something obvious. "Clients don't commit to partnerships. They commit to a single voice. One face, one story. That's how this works. So I'm a footnote. You're my wife, you're my partner. But in a pitch room they need certainty, not a committee." He took her hand. "You know what your work did today, isn't that what matters?" She wanted to say no. She should have said no. But she loved the work too much to let the argument ruin what the work had just accomplished. She told herself it was one time. She told herself they would fix it. They did not fix it. At the Canadian Interior Design Conference the following spring, Garrett spoke for 50 minutes about what the moderator called the Ashby methodology. The room gave him a standing ovation for ideas that Solange had first written down in a notebook on her kitchen table during a snowstorm 3 winters earlier. At the Ontario Architecture Prize shortlist, her environmental narrative framework was the conceptual basis of the submission. Her name was in the acknowledgments, below the name of the structural engineering firm. She started keeping records. Every original file with its timestamp, every notebook with its date, every email chain from the early development period where she was the only one in the thread. She didn't know yet exactly what she was building toward, but she kept building it anyway. The licensing papers were in a folder she wasn't supposed to find. She found them on a Tuesday evening in January, while looking for a client contract in the home office filing cabinet. It was a framework licensing agreement with an American hospitality group. 17 properties, US and Canada, covering the deployment of the environmental narrative methodology across their entire portfolio. The methodology was described in careful technical language, accurate in every detail. Her methodology, her calibration principles, her threshold theory, her light temperature sequencing protocols. Her name did not appear. She sat down on the floor with the folder and read it twice. When Garrett came home at midnight, she was still there. "Explain this to me." He glanced at the papers without alarm. "That's a licensing deal that's been in development for over a year. Significant revenue. I should have told you sooner. Your name is on it. The firm owns the commercial intellectual property, Solange. That's standard. You know that. I developed that framework before we were married. I have the notebooks, I have the original file timestamps. I have every draft from the beginning. And the firm holds the commercial application. That's not unusual." She looked at him for a long time. The thing she had been telling herself wasn't happening had been happening for 2.5 years, and she could no longer pretend she didn't know the shape of it. "I want a divorce," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. "You're exhausted," he said. "Let's have this conversation when you're not." "I'm completely clear," she said. "I want a divorce." Her lawyer, a precise woman named Deb who worked out of an office near King and Bay, reviewed the situation over 2 careful meetings. "Your original contributions are documented," Deb said, "but the firm holds commercial rights to the applied work. We can litigate, but the cost will likely exceed the recovery." "I don't want to litigate," Solange said. "I want something else." She explained what she wanted. Deb raised one eyebrow, wrote it down, and called her paralegal. The clause appeared in Section 9, Paragraph 4 of the settlement agreement, embedded in technical language dense enough that a skimming reader would move past it without resistance. 12 lines. It stated that in recognition of the documented origination of the proprietary design philosophy, known internally as the environmental narrative framework, any commercial application of said framework, generating net revenue in excess of $750,000 per annum, or receiving any major industry recognition at the national level, would trigger an attribution obligation and a 20% revenue participation, payable directly to S. Tremblay-Osei, with full public credit required in all future commercial materials. Garrett's lawyer reviewed the settlement in under an hour. The firm had just lost its anchor client and was restructuring debt. The methodology at that moment was generating nothing close to the clause's threshold. It looked academic. They signed. Solange walked out of Deb's office into a February afternoon, cold air off the lake cutting clean through her coat. And she breathed it in and felt, for the first time in years, like someone who had just finished building the thing she came to build. She took a teaching position at OCAD. She lectured. She consulted on projects that interested her under her own name, careful to document everything. She was not bitter, she was not in a hurry. She was patient in the way that people are patient when they have already done the important work and are simply waiting for the right conditions to reveal it. She had not planned to attend the Toronto Design Excellence Awards. She had known about the nomination, the Meridian Capital Headquarters Design of the Year, based entirely on the framework she had built, and she had decided not to go. She had made her peace with a lot of things over 4 years, and watching Garrett collect an award for her work, in a room full of people she respected, was not a peace she was prepared to make. Then Edmund Nakagawa's assistant called. The message was brief. Mr. Nakagawa believed she deserved to hear something in person. He asked her to come. She didn't know what that meant. She put on a burgundy dress and she went. Across the ballroom, Edmund had reached her and was looking at her hands. "You're Solange Tremblay-Osei," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. My team has spent 5 months trying to understand the Meridian building, the design intelligence in that project, the way it manages cognitive load through spatial sequencing. It's the most sophisticated environmental work I've seen in this country." He looked at her steadily. The problem was that the intellectual lineage didn't fit. The depth of the philosophy, the consistency of the thinking, the original development files that my consultant found in an archived server backup, none of it pointed to Garrett Ashby. He tilted his head slightly. "All of it pointed to you." Garrett arrived at that moment, Portia half a step behind him, his smile fully deployed. "Edmund, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "I came to meet the person whose work you've been presenting," Edmund said, without looking at him. The smile on Garrett's face did not disappear. It simply stopped working. I think there's a misunderstanding here." "There's no misunderstanding." Edmund's voice was the voice of a man who had never needed volume to be heard. "I know the difference between someone who built a thing and someone who learned to explain it." "You explain it very well, Mr. Ashby. Miss Tremblay-Osei built it." "Solange." Garrett turned to her, lowering his voice. "Whatever he's told you, whatever he thinks he's found, we can talk through this. We can revisit the attribution, restructure the credit arrangements." "He hasn't told me anything I didn't already know," Solange said. "I wrote that framework. I know it the way you know your own handwriting. I know what it's worth because I built it, and I knew what it was worth the morning I signed the divorce papers." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Not guilt exactly. More like the look of a man who has just understood that the ground he's been standing on was not what he thought it was. Edmund checked his watch. "The program is about to continue. There's an announcement I'd like to make." "What announcement?" Garrett's voice had gone tight. "The award tonight qualifies under a clause in your divorce settlement," Edmund said simply. "My legal team confirmed it this morning." Inside the main hall, the podium stood at the front of the room under warm downlights. The Design of the Year award sat on its plinth to the side. The room settled. The early categories moved through quickly. When Design of the Year was announced, Garrett walked to the stage with the ease of a man who had rehearsed this particular arrival. He received the award with both hands. He thanked his team. He talked about spatial philosophy, about design as emotional language, about the way a building could shape the interior life of the people who moved through it. He was 3 sentences from the end when Edmund Nakagawa rose. It spread through the room the way important things do. A stillness that moved outward from its source until it had the whole space. "I apologize for the interruption," Edmund said. "But I believe in correcting errors when I find them, and this one has been standing uncorrected for too long." On the screens behind the stage, the screens that had been cycling through sponsor acknowledgments, images appeared. Photographs of notebook pages covered in close handwriting, diagrams of spatial sequences, threshold geometry studies, light calibration charts, original documentation shot page by page. "This is the environmental narrative framework," Edmund said. "The design philosophy that produced the Meridian Capital Headquarters. The philosophy on which this award is being presented tonight, and on which Ashby Design Group has been generating licensing revenue across 20 commercial properties in North America." He paused. "This framework was created by Solange Tremblay-Osei." A photograph filled the screens, Solange at a studio whiteboard years ago, mapping out the first version of the threshold sequencing theory. Her handwriting covered the wall behind her. Her posture was the posture of someone inside an idea they can't fully see yet but already trust completely. Not Garrett Ashby. Not Ashby Design Group. One person, working before her marriage, during her marriage, and in the years since, developing a body of thought that her then-husband presented as his own in every pitch room, every press feature, and every award submission for the better part of a decade. Garrett stepped forward. "This is completely inappropriate. You have no right to." What I have, Edmund said, is 400 pages of original documentation, a licensing audit, and 3 legal opinions. What you have is a clause in a divorce agreement that your own lawyer signed off on at a time when neither of you thought it would ever be triggered. He stepped down from his position at the table. He walked across the room past the rows of silent, watching people. He stopped in front of Solange. He kissed her. Brief, deliberate. The kind of gesture that has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with saying what words make clumsy. When he pulled back, the room was so quiet the sound system's ambient hum was audible. That, he said quietly, just to her, is 4 years late. Garrett's voice came back in pieces. The clause, it's contested, we'll challenge it. Our legal position has already been reviewed by my firm and 2 independents I retained for this purpose, Edmund said. It's enforceable. You signed it when the firm had no assets that would make it matter. Your counsel moved past it. That's not Miss Tremblay-Osei's problem. Solange walked to the front of the room. She stood beside the podium, not behind it, and looked out at the assembled room. The architects and developers and journalists, and the city councilors who had stopped checking their phones. I didn't come tonight knowing what was going to happen, she said. Edmund sent me a message this morning that said I deserved to be present. I came because I trusted that. She was quiet for a moment. The room gave her the quiet. 6 years ago, I built a way of thinking about the human relationship to space that I believed in completely. I believed in it so much that I let my name disappear from it. I told myself the work was enough. That ideas had their own momentum. That what I had built would outlast what had been done with my name. She paused. I was wrong about that. Work doesn't speak for itself. People speak for it. And for too long, the wrong person was doing the speaking. She looked at Garrett. Not with anger, something quieter than that, more permanent. You told me once that clients need a single face, a single story, that partnerships confuse the narrative. You were right, you just chose the wrong face. The room exhaled, all at once, like something that had been held too long. I'm not here to dismantle anything, she continued. I'm here because a record has been wrong for 6 years and it needs to be corrected. That framework, those ideas, they're mine. From the first notebook page to the last licensing agreement. And starting tonight, the record will say so. Edmund was beside her again. The legal transfer of the revenue participation rights has been filed, he said. Effective immediately, Solange Tremblay-Osei will receive full attribution on every project, utilizing the environmental narrative framework and the applicable revenue participation retroactively. The Nakagawa Waterfront Commission will be developed under her direct creative leadership. Garrett looked around the room, the journalists, the investors, the faces of the people whose opinion had always been the architecture of his confidence. If I reject these terms, then you'll have a public record of the origination, a contractual clause your own lawyer executed, and a majority patron of this evening who has just declined to work with you in front of everyone in this room. Edmund's voice was neither warm nor cold, simply factual, but I don't think you'll reject them. I think you'll keep the firm. And I think you'll learn, possibly for the first time, what it actually means to give credit to the person who earned it. Portia had moved to the far edge of the room. The awards host stood at the side of the stage looking at the floor. Garrett said nothing. He held the award in both hands and said nothing at all. They left through the side exit together, onto a narrow street that ran along the south side of the hotel, the October air off Lake Ontario, carrying the particular cold that meant the season had finally committed to itself. You didn't have to do that, Solange said. I know. Edmund walked beside her without any urgency about it. I've spent my career trying to understand where value actually lives, not the packaging of it, the thing itself. He glanced at her. When my team first went through the Meridian building, I knew immediately that whoever had thought in that way, I needed to find them. It took me 5 months. I should have looked sooner. The kiss, she said. Was personal, he said. I heard you lecture at OCAD 3 years ago. Threshold theory. You were explaining it to second-year students and I stood at the back for 40 minutes and missed a dinner I'd been trying to schedule for 6 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know then how to be honest about that. Tonight seemed like the time. She laughed. It came out clean, the way a laugh does when it's been in a box for a while. You're either very brave or completely reckless. My board has been telling me both for 30 years. They walked toward the street. The lake was out there somewhere in the October dark, carrying its own weight quietly, the way water does. What happens now? Solange asked. Now, Edmund said, you go back to doing what you do, building things that make people feel something they can't name before they can name it. Only this time, the door has your name on it. She stopped. She looked back at the hotel, at the lit windows, and the noise, and the version of her life that had just rearranged itself into something true. Then she looked forward. She had written 12 lines into a settlement agreement on a cold February morning 4 years ago. The kind of careful language that makes eyes slide past without stopping. She had written them because she believed in what she had built even when everyone else was using it without saying her name. She had not waited for anyone to rescue her. She had not counted on luck or circumstance or the eventual goodwill of the man who had taken what was hers. She had planted something. She had been patient. She had bet on herself. And she had been right to, because the work was always there, documented and timestamped and true, waiting for someone to finally look closely enough to find it. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments which moment landed hardest. And subscribe to Brav Soul's Stories TV, because we believe every story where the truth finds its way home deserves to be told.